Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to welcome back to this week's show Todd Shepherd, the chief investigative reporter for a media outlet near Philadelphia known as Broad and Liberty. It's a news and opinion-based outlet based in southeastern Pennsylvania. As you may remember, Todd's background as an investigative journalist is extensive, as he has been a full-time reporter for 21 years since graduating from Oklahoma Baptist University. Todd started as a general assignment reporter for KOA in Denver, where he was twice honored with the Edward R. Murrow Award. He was then rewarded for his talent by getting the call to Washington, D.C., where he worked for the estimable and influential Washington Examiner, as well as for the Washington Free Beacon, before taking his current position as the chief investigative reporter for Broad and Liberty. You may remember it was Todd's work that broke the story on the Shapiro administration's sexual harassment scandal, which was picked up on the front page by both the New York Times and the New York Post. This will be the third installment for Todd on the Volpe Report. As promised after his last visit, we would keep bringing him back when there were new developments, and therefore you can assume there, in fact, were new developments. The sexual harassment affair for Governor Shapiro is starting to resemble former President Richard Nixon's Watergate. This is also starting to resemble a Netflix series on the Volpe Report with multiple installments, with today's show being the latest. And we expect multiple installments in the future each time something new breaks in the court proceedings, and the court case is now actually in Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. Again, the Shapiro administration keeps refusing to release some key elements of emails that were in the sexually harassed employees' server. And because of that, it's starting to resemble, you remember the 16 minutes of missing tape in the Watergate investigation, which finally was revealed? Well, we're not saying that's the smoking gun here, but it's sure starting to look like that with the vehemence in which the Shapiro administration is refusing to release those segments. They're fighting it to the end. We're going to find out why from Todd Shepherd.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Todd, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Hey, Chuck, glad to be here.
Well, as our audience already knows from my preview on you, and from my view of it, I think I've said this in past shows, your credentials as an investigative journalist at the highest level, your background, your resume speaks to that. And as our audience knows, and you know I also advertise on all the front pages, so they've already been tipped off. The headline promoting the show is Shapiro's Watergate. Now, I haven't gotten patented that or trademarked that distinction yet, Shapiro's Watergate, but it's led in every headline, and it has a lot of the same indicia, which we'll get into in the show, of Watergate in a cover-up that way back, I remember I was old enough to remember Watergate. And the thing I remember about Watergate was that it, like the explanations coming from our chief executive, Richard Nixon, didn't fly. That his subordinates could have the authority and do what they did without any knowledge in the Oval Office. And if you remember, the question became, what did the president know and when did he know it, if you remember? Well, I put that in this week's headline, so you know. What did Shapiro know and when did he know it? Because we're getting to the point, Todd, and I'll turn it over to you in a second, that it defies rational belief that this being, of course, one of his top political confidants, Mike Verb, one of his top executives, one of his most important cabinet-level positions, having driven back and forth to Harrisburg to the State House when they were both together in that, one of his personal friends, his chief of staff knew, key people knew, and for the governor to keep saying he didn't know about it, it was in the dark, he's now in Richard Nixon territory with, I've used this for my audience. They'll know this. Don't pee down my leg and tell me it's raining outside. Well, we're getting to that point with him right now. So with that background, I've likened this with you now on Josh Shapiro's Watergate, his sexual harassment claim, to like a Netflix series, like an 8-part episode. We're now in part 3, and now I'm sure the audience is interested from where he left off to now, and you can preview the next what's to come. But start where we left off. You were engaged in getting right to knows answered. They were fighting you and not giving you them. There were very mysterious deletions from certain key personnel's emails, including the woman that filed the complaint, when similarly situated people had their emails that were not deleted. So again, it defies what rational people would believe. So take it from there.
Yeah, so the governor comes into office January 2023, takes the oath, starts to build his staff. Obviously, the key people in a staff, they come together pretty quickly. You know who those are going to be, right? But you've got to fill those other staff people. So there's this young lady. She was probably 29 or 30-ish about the time that she applies for and gets a job in the Department of Legislative Affairs. So this is really one of the key departments of a governor's staff, right? I mean,
No doubt.
This is where you interface with the General Assembly. Mike Verb, as you mentioned his name already, Mike Verb had been the Director of Legislative Affairs for Shapiro in the AG's office. He's now going to do the same in the governor's office. This young lady comes to work in the office, and within a month, she basically says, I was being harassed by Mike Verb.
Can I just interject really quick, Todd? Just again, that Verb's a cabinet level position, arguably the most important cabinet level position, because even more than an attorney general, a governor, the cabinet level director of legislative affairs, his agenda depends on Mike Verb's ability to wheel and deal. So there's that. But the second thing I want to just again remind the audience, this woman wasn't from the steno pool. She was a deputy secretary, sub-cabinet level herself, correct?
She was. And I can tell you, Chuck, that as I have successfully obtained some of her, we'll get to the email deletion in a minute, but I was able to obtain some of her other emails. And let me tell you, this young woman was an incredible government professional. I mean, she was, she just worked as hard as you could want. Like, I'll just give you an example. At 3 p.m, I can read a lot of emails, but I don't have the mental energy to send a lot of really, she was incredible all throughout the day. I've seen this in her work product by going through her emails. She was an incredible asset to the governor's team. But so she doesn't even last a month. She basically said she makes accusations that Verb made these inappropriate approaches to her. Any approach in the workplace is improper, right? And so she quits basically almost exactly a month into her tenure. Of course, no one knows about this. Verb resigns in September. But the timeline is what still doesn't match up, because the governor, what his spokesperson told me was, well, the governor found out sometime about when the settlement talks were underway. Well, the settlement paper, I've seen the settlement. It was signed by the accuser and her team on August 31st of 2023. It was signed by the governor's team on September 1st. So they know in July or August what the allegations were. Verb doesn't resign until September 27th. So he hangs on another 4 weeks. How does that actually, probably even longer, because it's reasonable to assume the governor knew in July or August. So he could have hung on an extra 6 or 8 weeks after the governor knew. Now, keep in mind, this is all from a governor who made part of his claim to fame was his prosecution of the Catholic Church.
Of course. The
right?
cover-up, and all of it.
The cover-up and how you handle that. So, and in other parts, we've seen, Josh Shapiro, he says he has no contact with Mike Verb now. When he had his first press conference after this happened, he said that he wouldn't even use his name. He said, that person is no longer in our office, as though it were a good thing that he was out. And I would agree with that. But the governor hasn't answered the question, why wasn't he let go as soon as you know? So the new things that have happened since you and I last spoke, the governor he's done a couple of high profile, in-depth profiles with a couple of media outlets. One local, Philly Mag, that came out in the summer. And what was interesting with that was as he was pressed on certain issues with the how this was handled, they said, why wasn't he let go earlier? You said you didn't know early on about the accusations. Well, Governor Shapiro said, well, I didn't know because an HR policy prevented the allegations from being elevated to my level. Now, first of all, right? I mean, your face, I think, captures it. Like, I think
this is one of his best friends in the world, Todd. They have a personal relationship. This wasn't some GS-18 government hire that he just met when he said, oh, you're my legislative directive chairman. Of course not. They had a personal friendship and relationship. But I'm sorry, I couldn't contain myself. Go ahead.
I hear you. But so I took that quote. I put it in the right to know. I said, this is what the governor said. Using that language, I want you to find the exact human resources policy he's talking about and produce for me the exact human resources policy. And it was a policy that went back to 2014. It doesn't prevent escalation. In many cases, it requires. It says if the threat is serious enough, it needs to go up the chain. Through other right to know requests, I was able to, I was able to easily determine that two of his top aides, you sort of alluded to this in the beginning of the intro, his chief of staff, Dana Fritz, and his top legal counsel, Jennifer Selber, they both knew absolutely, probably within a day, but I can absolutely prove that they knew within a week. And so, in other words, it got to the very top, except for the top, if you believe Josh Shapiro's explanation. And quite honestly, I'm not going to say I've absolutely proven his explanation to be false, but I still have far more skepticism than I have belief in his policies or in his explanation. So his HR policy explanation just didn't hold up. The other new thing was The Atlantic, obviously a national publication with enormous reach and enormous credibility. They put out a profile on the governor last week. And again, it mentioned, they pressed him even further on the didn't know issue. They were like, that, for a governor that's a workaholic, for a governor that likes to say he's on top of everything in his staff and so forth, this is a tough explanation to swallow. I do find it interesting that, when the scandal first broke in 2023, he said, and by the way, I want the people of the Commonwealth to know that my administration is led by two strong women. And that's how they can know that these kinds of allegations are going to be handled efficiently, but also with a level of, a thought of safety for the whole office. Well, those two strong women are the ones I already mentioned, Dana Fritz, his chief of staff, Jennifer Selber, his top legal counsel. And again, if they knew in March, if they were in settlements in July and August, and then a settlement is cut in September 1st, why didn't they decide? Why didn't they go to the governor and say, Governor, he's got to go now, August 31st. He's got to go.
Can I offer a speculation for my audience? Of course they knew. I believe absolutely, have no proof, I get it. I follow your lead. You're the one that has the proof. I understand there's no documented empirical data. But again, I want to remind a key element for me, Todd, is that we're not talking just about a high-level top cabinet position, which would in and of itself mean a special relationship with the governor. We're talking about a high personal friendship. They're almost neighbors, for Christ's sake. They were close in Harrisburg. He took Mike Verb everywhere he went in terms of his move up the chain to attorney general and eventually governor. And to suggest that one of his best personal friendships, beside the maybe most important cabinet position, that his two top people, chief legal counsel and chief of staff, would not have talked to him about Mike Verb. Again, I get back to just pee down my leg and tell me it's raining outside while I'm watching you. It defies, we're into Richard Nixon territory now, but I'm sorry, I had to, again, get that out for our audience. Go ahead.
No, I think I appreciate all that. So The Atlantic, they pressed him harder on the how could you really not know? And he just said there were confidentiality reasons, which, again, I just don't swallow. And, I think if you take this back to the Catholic Church scandal and his efforts to investigate the archdiocese in Pennsylvania. I'm sure at points I can't bring up an exact quote, but it wouldn't surprise me to know that Josh Shapiro was probably critical of the leadership of the church for maybe not involving itself in the scandal as efficiently or as powerfully as they ought to have. And I think you can raise the same question of Josh Shapiro in this scandal, right? So those are the two main updates, at least in the media realm. For me personally, the latest update is I have two of my right to knows. I have kind of won them. I don't really want to get into the details because it can be a little in the weeds, but in two of these right to knows, I've sort of won from either the Office of Open Records or from a court the ability to get some of these documents, but now the governor is elevating those matters to court.
So the Commonwealth Court?
Yes. In two of these cases, they're taking it to Commonwealth Court. In one of these cases, and again, I apologize in advance, this is a little convoluted, but in one of these cases, it's a case that was already in Commonwealth Court. And essentially, I won it one time, and I'm using that term a little loosely because there's no such thing as like a total legal victory. But in general terms, the ruling was in my favor. The court sent much of the work back to the OOR. The Office of Open Records, again, after an in-camera review of many of the documents, again ordered many of the documents to be released to me. And now the governor's office is taking it back to Commonwealth Court. So they're challenging it. It's what is essentially, they're making a third challenge after I already won challenges 1 and 2. So they're really going in tooth and nail, hammer and tongs to fight this one challenge in particular. And I think that that's pretty revealing, if you ask me.
Of course. A couple of comments. First of all, if there's integrity and honesty involved, Todd, and you have nothing to hide, as the governor of this state, you should say, look, maybe I drug my feet a little bit. I should have been more attentive to it early on. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I get that part. But then say, we are fully going to release everything in this office and everything that my government and I control from this office about who knew what and when, so the people have a right to know that, to quote Richard Nixon, that their governor is not a crook, so kind of thing. So, but that isn't happening. He's fighting tooth and nail. That was one point. Here's the other point. And again, I always like to say when this is a hypothetical, speculation on my part. In a court of law, they'd be objecting. Speculation. Well, we're not in a court of law, but I'm telling my audience this. I have no evidence for this. It's pure conjecture. So I'll try to be Sherlock Holmes for a few minutes. Here's the part that bothers me, I guess, is that the only way it makes sense, Todd, to keep Mike Verb on for another month after all this pretty much happened, weeks after this, after the settlement, when now the governor has already acknowledged he knew. Here's my speculation. I think because of their close personal relationship, at some point, Mike Verb says in some hypothetical discussion, this could ruin me, and they're close friends, and they decide, and the governor consents to the idea that let's see how bad the blowback is. Let's see how bad this blows up, because it's a confidential settlement. No one's going to know about it. We hope, knock on wood. And if this just dies and goes away, no harm, no foul, and you can stay and you don't ruin your career. But then, of course, it did blow up. It did like mushroom cloud. And then, of course, he had to go, and out the door he went. Again, it's pure speculation, but you're intelligent. I'm intelligent. I'm a lawyer. I used to cross-examine people in courts. These are the inquiries. If I can get a witness on the stand, and we can't in this case, you can't really, but that's where it would be going. Well, you're a close friend. He's about to have his career destroyed. He stays a month suspiciously way too long, even after you acknowledge you knew it took that much extra time. Could you give me any other theory other than what I said that would make some sense? Because I don't pretend to be infallible, but I've tried to come up with another possible cogent theory why he would be there for another month until he finally was let go. But go ahead, Todd.
No, I have no explanation. And, you and I have both alluded to it 2 or 3 times in this broadcast, but just to be explicit for those who don't know, Mike Verb was a state representative from Montgomery County. And he was a state representative. His tenure had about 2/3 overlap with the same time that Josh Shapiro was a state representative. As you said, they're both from Montgomery County. They live close to one another. So they do go way back. They've known each other a long time. And Mike Verb is a Republican. I think Josh Shapiro liked, much in the way he's picked Al Schmidt to be his Secretary of State. Josh Shapiro has liked having sort of a bipartisan credibility by having a couple of Republicans on his staff, especially a couple that are in as powerful positions as Secretary of State and one who was at the time the Director of Legislative Affairs. So I can't answer that. But I would say the other thing that I find very curious that's along the same vein of the question you just raised is the way the Democrat caucus in the General Assembly has really fallen in line behind Shapiro. About 3 or 4 days after the scandal first broke in September of 2023. So it was October, the very first week. A group of 8 women Democrat senators had a closed-door meeting with the governor. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported that it was about the Verb scandal, and it reported that many of them came out of that meeting with some scowls on their faces. One of them, they didn't attribute this to the exact person. They kept it anonymous, but they quoted one of them as saying, "We still have a lot of questions." But let me use one in particular that I find very interesting. Katie Muth is a Democrat senator from Chester County. She won her election on the back of the Me Too movement, saying, look, there's a good old boys club in Harrisburg, and I'm going to take that down. And in fact, one of the very first things she did when she did get elected was she went after a Democrat senator, a fellow Democrat. She basically got him kicked out of office because of allegations that he had told some off-color and blue jokes in the office, and some other things. She has not commented on this scandal at all. And she used to author these long Twitter threads about the Me Too movement, especially as it related to Harrisburg. And since the Verb scandal has come up, she just doesn't bring that up anymore. And I wonder if she will even be able to ever bring it up anymore, because at this point, to do so, she would face questions, I would hope, from someone in the Harrisburg press corps. Hey, wait a second, you're on to this sexual harassment scandal now, but you were completely silent on the Mike Verb scandal.
Complicit.
So,
complicit.
Yeah, I think that he, in that meeting, he really told the Democrats in the General Assembly, you've got to get in line, you've got to back me, and that means you've got to be absolutely quiet about this scandal.
Agreed. We're going to take a break. We have a little bit of the show left, kind of future-oriented, what's next procedurally, and we'll get to that when we come back from this break, Todd.
There are more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 on Fox 56 or watch on YouTube at the Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier political talk show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
You would think, Todd, after 400 or 500 shows and 12 years of doing this weekly show, that I'd be able to break off and do a break at the 15-minute mark as the folks in the studio are kind of telling me, and you were going so well, and God knows I was right there with you. We blew through just about the whole show. We have 3 minutes left. In that time, it's going to be the most simple, direct examination question of all. What happens next?
Well, what happens next is whether or not the court agrees to let me get these documents. The way the court has handled the case so far has been extraordinary. It's been perfect down to the letter of the law, if you ask me. But this one set of documents, again, this is a court case that has already been before the Commonwealth Court. The Commonwealth Court more or less gave me a victory. It sent some of the documents back to the Office of Open Records for a second determination, and the Office of Open Records said I should get the documents. Now the governor's office is asking the Commonwealth Court to again second guess the Office of Open Records. That's incredible in my mind. From what I understand, the Commonwealth Court could refuse to take the case. If they refuse to take the case, that's a big win for me, and I think that will move the story forward.
No doubt. You know, I've analogized all this to Watergate. And for those in my audience or generally that are saying, Chuck, why do you compare something like this in Pennsylvania to a national tragedy, as it turned out, the resignation of a president? Well, let's remember, Watergate was a second-rate burglary. I would suggest that the sexual harassment of a highly educated and talented deputy secretary, sub-cabinet level going on in government by the director of legislative affairs is even a more significant issue than the issue in Watergate that toppled the government. And let me get back to your point. You know, as I said, I've likened all this to Watergate. It sounds like the final loss of Richard Nixon, what led to his resignation, there was a 16-minute tape that had been erased. You remember the tape that had been erased, apparently? And the person they didn't even know that this had been recorded. And once the courts effectively ruled that, no, they have to come out with that, that's when his support in the Republican House and Senate collapsed. The leaders went and said, Mr. President, we have to go along with this now. And that's when he resigned. So it sounds to me like we're getting closer. The Watergate analogy is still there. If some of these important documents you can get, this may actually prove what you've been alleging all along. Is that fair statement?
Yeah, and it is. I think especially to the degree we are still trying to figure out, because the governor's office will not answer the question. We know that the full email account for the female accuser, it was completely deleted. When was it deleted? Who authorized it? They will not answer those questions, and we're still trying to get to the bottom of those questions using the right to know law.
And one final point, just to my recollection, I'm slipping a little bit in my old age, but some of my memory still works. In our last case, the significance of that was that other similarly situated employees during that period of time did not have their emails erased. That is correct, right?
Yes, that's more right to know work we did once they told us that they had deleted her email account because it was a matter of how she had left the office. Well, we picked 2 or 3 other people that also left the offices, and we right to know their emails, and we got them because they had not deleted their account.
Well, again, I don't know how much the audience... The audience is our jury, Todd, effectively on television. It's the biggest jury. I guess in a way it beats the 12 when you go into a courtroom. But at any rate, all our job and my job is to tell people the truth. Your job, and thank you for what you do as an investigative journalist, because you speak truth to power, and ultimately government must be held accountable and must be honorable and must actually practice what they preach. And we have a case where that may not be the case.
I'm blessed that my employers at Broad and Liberty give me great latitude and great resources to do all of those things. So thank you, Chuck.
And we're blessed on the Volpe Report that you then share them with us and our audience. Godspeed on your work, Todd. And again, this is like a Netflix series. We're going to come back once the Commonwealth Court makes a determination or effectively denies the appeal, which is a final order then. Although I would suggest if that happens, as a lawyer, they're going to Supreme Court. That's where it'll be. Yeah, he campaigned pretty aggressively for the yes-no retention for 3 of the Democratic justices. So we'll see how this goes. But thank you, Todd. And if I don't see you, have a wonderful Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, you and your family.
Thanks, Chuck. Same to you and to all of your viewers.
God bless. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.